When you think about popular K-pop groups, Blackpink is one of the first names that comes to mind. They're massively successful, not just in the US, but around the world. Their reach is almost incomprehensible. Now, with 10 years under their belt and a new project out, some cracks in the foundation are impossible to ignore. But were they able to patch things up to meet the deadline? Spoiler alert, no. Hey guys, we have another dramatic intro for the books. Today's video was actually one that you suggested. Just over 2 weeks ago, I made a poll on my post tab asking what album you guys wanted me to cover next. Surprisingly, it was closer than I thought. For the longest time, I was winning with their new album, Revive Plus, but when I sat down to write this script, Deadline won by a hair. If you want to participate in other polls for future videos, please consider subscribing. Speaking of which, oh my god, we just hit 2,000 subscribers. Thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. It truly means the world to me. Without getting too sappy, let's get on with the video. I want to start this off by getting this out of the way. If you clicked on this video expecting in-depth analysis and lyric breakdowns, I'm really sorry, but it's just not happening. In case you're new, I usually go song by song and interpret the lyrics to varying levels of depth depending on the artist, song, and also just how inspired I am. Like a lot of you know, I have a love-hate relationship with Blackpink. I made a video about a month ago talking about the underutilization of the group. I'll link it in the iCard if you haven't seen it. In that, I talk at length about my frustrations as a fan turned casual listener and how I felt the group's potential was being wasted. Add to that, I made another video a few months back posing the question, should Blackpink come back? Once again, link in the iCard. In that video, I predicted that we would get a half-assed mini, a formulaic title track, and a chaotic tour. And with the release of this mini, I can safely say I pretty much nailed it. After the release of Born Pink, The Second Drought, and their solo eras, one thing became very clear to me. Something they had been doing almost the entire time, but a lot of fans, myself included, were just turning a blind eye to. Blackpink chose the Western market, and I feel no other mini album reflects this choice better than Deadline. So let's talk about it. Jump. I've already made a whole video talking about Jump when it first dropped, so I'm not going to spend too much time rehashing everything I said, but I do think it's important to revisit it now in the context of the full album. If you didn't watch that video, my main takeaway was, I just wasn't the biggest fan, and honestly, sitting with it longer hasn't really changed that. The song still feels like the same Blackpink formula we've heard before, just dressed up in a slightly different aesthetic. It leans into this Western cowboy meets 90s dance pop vibe, which sounds interesting in theory, but in execution, it never fully commits to either direction in a way that feels fresh. Instead, it kind of lands in this middle ground where nothing really stands out. It's not bad, but it's not exciting either, and to me, that's almost worse for a comeback of this scale. One thing that has shifted, at least a little bit, is the fake out at the end. I still don't like it on principle because it builds up tension that ultimately doesn't go anywhere, but I can admit those final 20 seconds are probably the most engaging part of the song. Unfortunately, I feel that says a lot. And then we have the lyrics. I feel this is also where the song really loses me. And to be clear, I never expected Blackpink to be lyrical geniuses. I don't think that's what anyone comes to them for. But even within that expectation, or lack thereof, this just feels especially underwhelming. It's the same topics, the same energy, just slightly reworded. And for a song that's supposed to mark such a big return, it ends up feeling mostly low effort. Like really? This was your big return after so many years, and it's this bad? That's what makes it such a confusing choice for me. This is your first major release after years, and instead of feeling like a statement, it feels like a placeholder. It doesn't push anything forward, it doesn't redefine anything, it's just there. And unfortunately, that nothing burger feeling ends up setting the tone for the entire album. Go. Moving into the new material, Go is where I really started to feel frustrated, because my immediate thought when I heard it was, this sounds like an intro track. It has that build up, that sense of anticipation, like it's supposed to kick off something bigger. And if it had been placed at the beginning of the album, I probably would have understood it and maybe appreciated it more, but as an actual standalone moment, it just feels incomplete. And beyond that, it's just very generic. It's one of those songs where you feel like you've definitely heard something similar before, but you can't quite pinpoint what it is. And that lack of identity makes it really hard to connect with. Nothing about it lingers after it ends, which is especially disappointing considering the context of this album. Because when you choose the release model they did, every song should be good, especially when you're waiting multiple years in between. If this era is meant to further establish Blackpink in the Western market, then every song should feel intentional. Western audiences, especially after long hiatuses, expect a certain level of purpose in each release, and Go just doesn't really deliver that. It feels like filler in a rollout where there shouldn't be filler. It's like 5 songs for crying out loud. Trying to give it the benefit of the doubt, I'm not a fan of these chanty type songs, but the lyrics for this one truly just felt like they were twisting the knife for sort of laughing in our face, which adds another layer of disconnect for me. The whole "we run this, we control the crowd" type of messaging isn't new, but here it feels unusually direct, almost to the point where it comes across like they're acknowledging that no matter what they release, people are going to show up for it anyway. And that's what bothers me, because yes, that level of fan support is something every artist wants, but at the same time, if you know you have that kind of loyalty, wouldn't that be the perfect opportunity to take risks? To experiment and actually push your artistry forward? When you're clearly trying to operate within a Western framework, that kind of growth isn't just appreciated, it's expected. Instead, this feels like they're trying to play it as safe as possible to the point where it just became nothing. Me and My. Then we get to Me and My, which is probably the most traditionally quote-unquote Blackpink sounding track out of the entire project. And in a different context, that might have been a strength. You could easily slot this into Born Pink or even the album and it wouldn't feel out of place at all. But for me, that's actually the issue. Because at this point in their career, especially after such a long gap, I'm not really looking for something that just fits in. I'm looking for something that builds on what they've already done. Something that shows growth or at least a shift in direction. And this doesn't really do that. It ends up feeling less like consistency and more like stagnation. Like we're revisiting a sound we already know without adding anything new to it. And while I can appreciate that it feels more aligned with their core identity over some of the other tracks, it still doesn't push that identity forward in any meaningful way. The delivery, especially in the rap sections, is also where things started to feel a bit uncomfortable for me. The cadence and tone lean heavily into a style that they feel a bit too comfortable in. Combine that with certain lyrical choices and imagery, it starts to blur the line between inspiration and imitation, if you catch my drift. Though I shouldn't be surprised. YG has a history of using black culture and artists as quote-unquote inspiration. I do want to be careful with how I phrase this because I'm not the most qualified to talk about it, because even though I'm a minority, I am white passing. This is simply a bigger conversation and I don't think this one song alone is the place to fully unpack it. But it did take me out of the experience, because instead of feeling authentic, it starts to feel a bit performative, and that's a major issue when you're trying to appeal, again, to a Western audience, where authenticity is such a huge part of how music is received. I will say, Pull Up With a Lot serving body does eat. Champion. Champion is probably the point where I fully checked out if I'm being honest. And to be fair, part of that is just personal preference. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, this big chant-heavy anthemic style isn't really my thing. But even putting that aside, I still think this is one of the weaker moments on the album. The message itself is fine, I guess. It's about striving for greatness, pushing forward, all of that. And initially, it doesn't feel overly self-congratulatory, which I appreciated. Until Lisa came in with the second verse, but I'll ignore that. The problem is that musically, it goes exactly where you expect it to go. There's no twist, nothing that makes it stand out from every other song with a similar concept. It's almost predictable to a fault. Like the second you see the title champion, you can already hear what the chorus is going to sound like in your head, and then the song delivers exactly that without adding anything new to the formula. There is one moment I genuinely liked though, and that's the bridge. When the production shifts into something a bit more electronic, it actually caught my attention. It felt like the song was finally about to take a risk or move in a more interesting direction. But then it quickly falls back into the same structure, and that moment just ends up feeling like a missed opportunity. Fxxboy. I don't know if I could say that. Closing out the track is the title, which is probably my favorite song here, although that's not really saying much. I do think the concept is interesting. Flipping the script and leaning into that more reckless player energy from their side is a fun idea, and it feels a bit more intentional than some of the other tracks. I even like some of the lyrical choices. Although cliche, some lines hit harder than others. But even with that, it still feels underdeveloped. Like it never fully commits to doing something memorable with that concept. It kind of stays in this safe, mid-tempo space without really building to anything impactful. Sonically, there were also moments where it felt a bit too familiar. Certain parts of the progression and melody reminded me a lot of Dream off of Lisa's alter ego. I promise my video on that is still in the schedule. Especially in ways that made it hard not to draw comparisons, and once that connection clicked for me, it became difficult to separate the two. So while I don't outright dislike this track, I also don't feel strongly about it in a positive way either. It just ends up being another song on the album that I don't feel compelled to revisit, and in the blink of an eye, pun intended, it's over. Album thoughts. Overall, I think it's pretty clear that this album just didn't land for me. And what makes that more disappointing is that I went into it wanting to like it. I tried to give each song multiple listens and tried to find something to latch onto, but in the end, it all just felt empty. None of these tracks really feel like they justify the wait. Not for a comeback, and definitely not for something tied to such a major milestone. If anything, a lot of them feel like they needed more time and intention. Maybe with more development, they could refine these songs into something worthy of being a hiatus-ending release, cause the ideas are there, but they never feel fully realized. And that's what leads me into the bigger point I've been circling around this entire video. This album feels like Blackpink, and by extension YG, are trying to operate within the Western market without fully committing to what that actually demands. Because in Western music, taking long breaks between releases is completely normal. But the expectation is that when you come back with something fully formed. Something that feels intentional and authentic. And that's really the key word, authenticity. People want to feel like they're connecting with the artist, not just consuming a product. And the moment something feels overly manufactured, it gets called out almost immediately. But K-pop operates on a completely different system. It's polished, structured, and heavily curated. Idols are trained for years, and music is often released at a much faster pace to maintain visibility and momentum, only to discard these acts once they fall off. As for Blackpink, they've spent years existing between these two worlds. But with Deadline, it feels like they tried to take advantage of both, keeping the long gaps of the Western industry while still relying on the safer, more formulaic approach of K-pop. And that combination just doesn't work, because you can't disappear for years, come back with something that feels underdeveloped, and expect it to hit the same way. Or at least, not without people starting to question it. And I think that's where this album ultimately falls short. It's not just about whether the songs are good or bad, it's about what they represent. Because at this point, we already know Blackpink can succeed. The real question is whether they're willing to evolve. And based on this album, I'm not sure we have that answer yet. Sorry for being such a Debbie Downer with this one. I hope it comes across that my frustration comes from a place of love and not just hate for the sake of hating. I've seen a lot of Blinks become more vocal about their dissatisfaction with this release, so I'm glad I'm not the only one. But it's still scary to stand on my little soapbox explaining why things fell so short. However, I think it's important to do so. I've talked in the past about putting your money where your mouth is. If you don't like something, don't support it. And that goes for music and groups as well. If you don't click with a project or you felt it was subpar, don't consume it. When we vote with our dollar, it sends a message to these companies that we as consumers won't just stand for whatever low-grade slop they want to throw at us. Will there be people who unironically like the songs? Yeah, and that's also the beauty of art. It's subjective. But it is worth noting that when a large group of people are voicing the exact same opinion, it's not always a hive mentality. Maybe there is something a bit deeper going on. But that's where I'll leave it. Thank you guys so very much for watching this video. I'm sorry it took me forever to put out. I just genuinely didn't know how to make this video without the fear of getting cancelled. I hope I was able to convey my thoughts clearly and concisely, and that you can see where I'm coming from. Because once again, art is subjective. I also want to thank you guys once again for all the love and support on my twice This Is For fan cam footage. So many of you have subscribed from them, so I really hope you enjoy your time here. A little heads up, my next video will be a compilation of all my footage from the concert, including some less interesting clips I recorded. This is mostly for my own preservation, cause it's like 17 gigabytes of footage and I need to get it off my phone. But anyways, thank you guys so very much for watching. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Click that bell icon so you're notified every time I post a video. Tell me in the comments down below, what are your thoughts on this album? Did I miss the mark, or did they rush to meet the deadline? Remember that I love you all so much, and I'll see you guys later this week. Bye!